They tell you to invest in love. They say it's noble, mature, romantic. But the truth? The worst investment a young man can make in his 20s is a woman. Not because women are the problem, but because in your 20s, you are. You're unstable. You're uncertain. You're still figuring out who the hell you are. And yet, you pour everything you have, time, energy, dreams, money, focus, into someone who's also trying to figure herself out. That's not love. That's two incomplete people clinging to each other for balance, mistaking dependency for destiny. You see, love at that age feels powerful because it fills the void you refuse to confront. You confuse being needed with being valued. You confuse attachment with connection. You think you're growing together, but what's really happening is this: you're slowing each other down. You're building emotional houses on quicksand, convinced it's solid ground. The 20s are the years where a man's direction is forged or destroyed. They are the years when you either learn to master yourself or you give your power away in the name of affection. Because when a young man invests in a woman before he's built a foundation for himself, he doesn't just risk heartbreak, he risks collapse. Think about it. You meet her. She's beautiful, ambitious, mysterious. She sees something in you that no one else does. And suddenly, your world begins to orbit hers. You start shaping your choices around her moods. You start measuring your worth by her approval. You stop chasing goals that don't involve her. You start believing that she is the purpose, not the partner. And that's the trap, the invisible drain that bleeds potential from men too early. Because at that age, you're not supposed to give yourself away. You're supposed to build yourself. You're supposed to experience loss, rejection, solitude, not escape it through companionship. Every hour you spend convincing her to stay is an hour stolen from your craft, your discipline, your identity. Every emotional argument, every late-night apology, every desperate text, they all come at a cost. And the invoice always arrives later, in regret. Society romanticizes young love. Movies, music, social media, they glorify the idea of growing together. But look closer. How many of those stories end with both people stronger? How many end with one person drained, directionless, and broken? Most young men never realize it until it's too late. You can't grow when your emotional survival depends on someone else's attention. The cruel irony is this: while you're investing everything into her, she's investing in herself. She's learning what she wants, who she can attract, what kind of life she deserves. You're busy proving your worth, she's busy exploring her options. And when the dynamic shifts, when she outgrows you, or gets bored, or simply decides you no longer fit the image she's crafting, you're left bankrupt. Emotionally, sometimes financially, always spiritually. You see, your 20s are not for balance. They're for chaos. They're for risk, for hunger, for the ruthless pursuit of identity. When you anchor yourself to someone too early, you rob yourself of that hunger. You trade discovery for comfort, ambition for affection. And comfort is the slowest poison a man can drink. Most men never recover from that early comfort. They spend years chasing the ghost of that first real relationship, trying to replicate a feeling that was never love, just dependency. They enter their 30s with nothing but fragments of who they could have been. So no, your worst investment in your 20s isn't crypto, or a bad business, or a wasted degree. It's giving your best years to someone who doesn't even know what she wants yet. It's believing that partnership will complete you before you've completed yourself. It's thinking love is something to find instead of something to earn. Because the truth is brutal, but necessary. You cannot give stability when you don't have it. You cannot lead when you're still lost. And no woman, no matter how beautiful or understanding, can fix the parts of you that you refuse to face. That's why the investment fails. Not because of her, but because you invested too soon. I once knew a man named Eric, 24 years old, bright, hungry, the kind of man who could turn ideas into action. He had this spark, that quiet, unshakable intensity that only youth can carry. He wanted to build something, a business, a legacy, a name. Then he met her. She wasn't a bad woman, far from it. She was kind, clever, and she loved him with all the drama of a young heart. But soon, his mornings were no longer his. His nights belonged to her moods, her doubts, her fears. When she cried, he stayed. When she doubted herself, he abandoned his goals to reassure her. The business he wanted to build turned into an idea he used to have. The man he wanted to become became the man she needed him to be. 2 years later, she left. No betrayal. No violence. Just disinterest, quiet and cold. She said she needed space. He said he understood. But the truth? He didn't. He had given everything and still lost. I saw him again years later, working at a job he hated, carrying the ghost of her in his silence. And when I asked what happened, he said something I never forgot. I spent my 20s proving I could love someone. I should have spent them proving I could love myself. That's the kind of heartbreak men rarely talk about. Not the pain of rejection, but the pain of wasted potential. The realization that while you were busy trying to be enough for someone else, you became nothing to yourself. There's another story, more subtle but just as destructive. A man named Jason, 27, engineer, brilliant, but soft-hearted. He met a woman who admired his gentleness. She said he was different from other men. He loved that. It made him feel special, safe, chosen. So when she asked him to move to another city for her job, he did. When she asked him to postpone his startup idea to help her settle in, he did that too. And when she started growing distant, scrolling through her phone with that same look of boredom every night, he told himself it was just a phase. It wasn't. She found someone else, someone who didn't make her feel safe, but made her feel alive. And Jason? He stayed behind. New city. No business. No direction. Just confusion and a quiet bitterness toward a world that had promised him love was worth it. That's the cruel paradox. Women rarely ruin men. Men ruin themselves for women. They misinterpret devotion as purpose. They trade their focus for the illusion of connection. And by the time they realize it, the fire inside them has gone out. But not every story ends in heartbreak. Some end in emptiness. Like the men who stay. The ones who stay in relationships long after the spark dies. Afraid to start over, afraid to be alone. They build lives around compromise, confusion, and quiet resentment. They become shadows of their younger selves, polite, dependable, emotionally hollow. They don't cheat, they don't rage, they don't rebel. They just slowly stop existing. It's a tragedy that hides behind smiles and Instagram captions. The happy couple that never grew, they just adapted to mutual mediocrity. And every year that passes, he loses a little more of that sharpness, that masculine edge that once defined him. But there's another kind of man, the one who sees the pattern early. He watches his friends get lost in relationships that drain them, and he quietly decides, not me. He chooses solitude. He chooses discomfort. He pours his time into his craft, his body, his purpose. He's not cold, he's focused. He understands that love, when given too early, dilutes a man's potential. And by the time he reaches his 30s, he stands differently. He speaks differently. Because he's built something no heartbreak can take away, himself. That's what most young men miss. You don't need to hate women to protect yourself. You just need to understand timing. You can love deeply later, when your foundation is unshakable. But in your 20s, love should be the fire that drives you, not the anchor that holds you down. The danger isn't in loving a woman. It's in making her your mission before you've found your own. And when you do that, when your sense of worth depends on how she sees you, every argument feels like a crisis, every distance feels like death. Because you've placed your identity in her hands. That's not love. That's worship. And worship always ends in ruin. But here's the quiet truth men rarely hear. A woman cannot respect a man who loses himself for her. Not truly. She may say she wants devotion, but deep down, she wants direction. She wants to follow a man who knows where he's going, not one who needs her to tell him where to stand. And that's why the relationships of your 20s rarely last. They're not built on truth. They're built on need. Two people searching for identity in each other's eyes, mistaking reflection for connection. By the time the mirror breaks, there's nothing left but pieces. There comes a point when a man looks back at his 20s and realizes he didn't live them. He gave them away. To the wrong woman. To the wrong dream. To the wrong idea of love. And that's when the anger begins. Not the loud, violent kind. Not the kind that breaks things. The quiet kind. The kind that festers behind polite smiles and long silences. The kind that makes a man stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m., replaying every moment he chose comfort over purpose, validation over growth, her needs over his mission. You start remembering the small moments that seemed meaningless at the time. The night you skipped the gym to stay on the phone with her for hours. The weekend you canceled plans to make her feel special. The job opportunity you turned down because she didn't want you to move. The silence you swallowed instead of speaking your truth just to keep the peace. Each one seemed small, harmless, even loving, but together, they were the slow death of your fire. That's how most men lose themselves, not in one grand tragedy, but in 1,000 quiet compromises. You don't notice the decay until it's too late. Until you wake up one day, look in the mirror, and realize the man staring back at you isn't ambitious anymore. He's obedient. He's safe, predictable, contained. You tell yourself it's love, but love shouldn't cage you. Love should sharpen you. It should make you more dangerous to your limitations, not more loyal to them. Yet in your 20s, you mistake emotional chaos for depth. You call it passion when it's really dependency. You call it connection when it's really fear of being alone. You call it commitment when it's really surrender. And then she leaves. She always leaves, maybe not physically but emotionally. Because deep down she can sense it too. A woman can feel when a man has stopped chasing his purpose and started chasing her approval. And that's the moment she loses respect, not out of cruelty, but instinct. She starts testing you, pulling back, questioning you, withdrawing affection, not because she wants to hurt you, but because she needs to know if there's still a man underneath the devotion. Most fail that test. They beg, they negotiate, they promise to do better. And in that moment, the relationship dies. Because no woman can love a man she doesn't respect. And no man can respect himself once he's begged for love. It's a vicious cycle, one that turns bright young men into hollow versions of themselves. They become emotionally available, but spiritually empty. Caring but powerless. Romantic, but broken. And the world applauds it. It tells them they're good men, because they gave everything. But giving everything is not noble when you're giving it to the wrong person, or before you've built yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't lead from a broken center. Love given from weakness will always be received with indifference. That's the hardest truth of all. Because it means that every act of devotion, every sacrifice, every desperate attempt to hold on, wasn't love. It was fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of insignificance. Fear of facing yourself without someone to distract you from your own emptiness. And that fear doesn't just break relationships, it breaks men. It kills ambition. It drains focus. It turns once-driven individuals into emotional caretakers. You become her therapist, her cheerleader, her safety net. And she becomes your purpose, the center of your identity. You lose your edge because you've replaced challenge with comfort. Comfort. That word should terrify every young man. Because it feels warm, but it rots you from the inside. Comfort breeds complacency. And complacency kills hunger. And once your hunger dies, so does your destiny. That's why so many men hit their 30s feeling lost. They did everything right by society's standards, loyal, loving, committed, yet they feel hollow. Because they traded the battle for belonging. They forgot that a man is not meant to be domesticated in his youth, he's meant to be forged. When you give your 20s to a woman, you give her the years meant to shape your soul. You hand over your uncertainty, your restlessness, your potential, all the chaos that was supposed to become strength, and you call it love. But what it really is avoidance. You're hiding from your own becoming, using intimacy as anesthesia. You tell yourself you're building together. But you're not. She's building herself through you. And you're dissolving yourself into her. And the cruelest part? When she finally leaves, you'll hate her for it, not because she betrayed you, but because she forced you to face what you've become, a man with no mission, no drive, and no sense of self beyond her. That's why heartbreak hurts so deeply for men. It's not just the loss of love, it's the confrontation with your own emptiness. The silence after she's gone feels unbearable because it exposes how much of your life was built around someone else's presence. But that pain, that brutal, suffocating pain, is also a teacher. It's the beginning of rebirth if you let it be. Because once you've been destroyed by love, you have two choices. You can become bitter, or you can become awake. Bitterness keeps you chained to the past. Awakening sets you free to rebuild. Not softer, not colder, but sharper. You learn that love isn't evil, but it's dangerous when you haven't built yourself first. You learn that no woman will ever complete you. She can only meet you once you've completed yourself. And you finally understand that loneliness isn't a curse, it's a forge. The solitude you once feared becomes your sanctuary. Because in that silence, you begin to remember who you are, or maybe discover him for the first time. The hunger returns. The fire returns. And one day, you look in the mirror and realize, you're no longer waiting for someone to make you feel alive. You are alive. That's when love becomes possible again, not as a crutch, but as a choice. Not as an escape, but as an extension of strength. Until then, every relationship you enter too early is just a rehearsal for heartbreak. And the truth is, most men never make it past the rehearsals. They just keep auditioning for love, playing roles that were never theirs to play. But a few, a rare few, they stop auditioning. They walk off the stage. And they start building their own script. That's when a man finally understands. In your 20s, love isn't your mission. You are. At some point, you stop being angry. You stop blaming her. You stop blaming love. You start seeing it for what it was, a lesson disguised as loss. Every man who's ever been broken by a woman in his 20s eventually learns that she wasn't the mistake. The timing was. Because love, real love, requires strength. It demands direction, purpose, identity. And those things aren't found in your 20s, they're forged there. You can't skip the suffering. You can't shortcut the solitude. Those are the seasons that turn a boy into a man, and a man into something unshakable. But most never make it that far. They confuse affection for fulfillment. They chase validation like it's oxygen. And by the time they realize that every good morning text was a distraction, they've lost years they'll never get back. You see, the real tragedy isn't heartbreak. It's that we live in a world where young men are taught that love is the ultimate goal instead of self-mastery. Where being a good boyfriend is praised more than being a grounded man. Where sacrifice is glamorized, but discipline is mocked. We grow up thinking love will save us from our loneliness. But loneliness isn't something to be saved from. It's something to learn from. Because it's in loneliness that you discover what you truly want. It's in the silence, in the hunger, in the endless hours of isolation, that you finally begin to hear the voice of your purpose. The world wants you to fall in love before you've learned how to stand alone. It wants you soft, distracted, emotionally dependent. Because a man in love too early is a man who can be controlled by desire, by emotion, by fear. But a man who's learned to be alone? He's dangerous. Not violent. Not cruel. Dangerous because he's centered. Because his happiness no longer depends on the approval or affection of anyone. And that's when the game changes. That's when love stops being a trap and starts becoming a choice. When you can walk away, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. When you can give without losing yourself. When you can love without worshiping. When you can say no and still feel whole. That's the power of solitude. It turns need into preference. It takes the desperate boy who would have done anything for attention and turns him into a man who no longer negotiates his worth. Because now he understands, his value doesn't rise and fall with someone else's affection. You start to see women differently. Not as saviors. Not as enemies. But as mirrors, reflecting the parts of you that still need healing. Some will reflect your weakness. Some will reflect your strength. But none of them can create either. That's your job. The men who never learn this spend their lives repeating the same story, falling for the same kind of woman, making the same sacrifices, feeling the same emptiness. Different faces, same endings. Because they never face themselves. But the men who do learn, they become something else entirely. They become calm, purposeful, detached, not from love, but from dependency. They no longer chase validation, they radiate certainty. They don't beg for loyalty, they command respect. They don't chase, they attract, because they've become the kind of man worth orbiting. And here's the final irony. Once you stop investing in women and start investing in yourself, the right kind of women begin to appear. Not the ones who want to mold you, but the ones who recognize you. Not the ones who test you, but the ones who trust you. Not the ones who drain you, but the ones who add to you. Because that's what love is supposed to be, two complete people choosing each other without fear, without dependency, without illusion. But that kind of love can't exist when one person is still unfinished. That's why your 20s aren't meant for forever. They're meant for becoming. And maybe years later, when the chaos has settled, when you've built something that cannot be taken from you, she'll appear, not as salvation, but as reflection. You'll recognize her. Not because you need her, but because she fits the rhythm of the life you've already built. And in that moment, you'll finally understand why every heartbreak, every mistake, every lonely night was necessary. Because pain was never your punishment. It was your purification. So if you're in your 20s now, and you're pouring your time, your money, your dreams into someone who doesn't even know who she is yet, stop. Not because she's unworthy, but because you're not ready. You haven't met the man you're supposed to become. And until you do, every woman you meet will be a lesson, not a love story. Build yourself. Bleed for your goals. Suffer for your vision. Be ruthless with your focus. Because when you finally become the man you were meant to be, you'll realize something profound. The best investment you could have ever made in your 20s was you. And when that truth settles in, when you finally stand on your own, unshaken, undistracted, unafraid, you'll look back at all the heartbreak and whisper the words every real man eventually learns to say, "Thank God she left."